I love Destiny 2, but the truth is Destiny 1 had some incredible stuff that either didn't make it into D2 or wasn't done as well in D2. So now, 4 years after the end of D1, we're taking a trip down memory lane and recalling 17 things Destiny 1 did better than Destiny 2. To be clear, I think Bungie certainly made some big improvements over time with Destiny 2, but with that said, there's no denying that some aspects of the sequel didn't quite live up to the original. From stuff like the Sparrow Racing leak to Destiny 1's gorgeous raid armor design, there are plenty of in-game systems, weapons, and items that veteran players often get nostalgic about when we think back to the days of Destiny 1. And even if you didn't play Destiny 1, I imagine you'd probably be really interested to hear about the main features that made players love the game so much and sometimes even say that D1 is a better game overall. The first thing on the list is actually something my friend Pattycakes recently reminded us about with a tweet: the reward screen at the end of D1 activities. Does anyone else miss the anticipation of finding out what loot you would get and then probably watching the person on the bottom of the leaderboard get exactly what you're hoping for? While we're on the subject of loot, this next topic is perhaps the most common thing I see people saying they miss from Destiny 1: strike-specific loot. These were unique rewards that were only obtainable from certain strikes, and this overall system was a massive hit among the community. Strike-specific loot was the source of countless popular weapons like Grasp of Malak, Imago Loop, Stolen Will, and Devil's Dawn. These weapons were often thematically paired with the contents of the strike, and many players have fond memories of farming for the exact role they wanted. There were even armor pieces like these sign cloaks that made it feel like you were actually looting the enemies in the strike instead of just getting random, unrelated RNG loot for no reason. The system really added a ton of value to strikes, and it made it feel like Bungie was really invested in and putting loot behind the core activities in the game. It provided an actual reason to repeatedly play strikes, and together with the skeleton key system, it allowed for focus farming of the exact loot you wanted, and everybody loved it. In Destiny 2, we did get a very limited version of the strike-specific loot for stuff like the Mindbenders, but since it was only available in Nightfalls, it didn't add any value to the largely irrelevant strike playlist. Hopefully someday soon, Bungie will start to invest just a little bit more into the core D2 playlist to keep things interesting and replayable between seasons and content releases. Having viable Crucible weapons like the Frozen Orbit drop from PvP is a good first step, but it would be awesome to have more rare and coveted PvP loot dropping from Crucible, as was the case with D1's version of IS Luna. The next thing is probably controversial because it's purely subjective, but the general consensus seems to be that most people preferred the D1 armor designs and overall aesthetic themes. The Age of Triumph sets in particular are often referenced as some of D1's best armor, and honestly, it's pretty hard to disagree. There's something just so undeniably cool and unique about every single set, and it's obvious that each set fits in perfectly with the aesthetic of each raid. Just like the strike-specific loot, players wanted to wear raid armor and use raid weapons that truly fit the themes of the activities, and Luke Smith actually said it perfectly way back in the day during the Taken King.
Because we want to wear his like a hat.
This theme of activity-inspired armor really carried all throughout Destiny 1, and players loved the idea of actually wearing what they defeated. Outbreak Prime coming from the whole Siva-themed Wrath of the Machine raid just made sense, and when is Siva coming to D2, by the way? People love stuff like the fully taken armor, the Vogue Hunter's Vex leg, the Iron Banner outfits that included a Wolf Hunter cloak, and Iron Lord themed design, and weapons that felt like they truly belonged in the activity they were acquired from. Weapons like Finale's Peril, Fellwinter's Lie, Clever Dragon, and Aphrodite's Spear just fit perfectly into the Iron Banner aesthetic. People also loved the Trials loot, and especially the Hunter armor set. Unfortunately, D2 has kinda strayed from this philosophy and no longer has a strong connection between activity, enemy, and armor appearance. Given the presence of transmog in Destiny 2, I think it would be amazing to get some armor that is a little bit closer to the D1 vibes, and especially in the case of Titans, perhaps just a little bit less bulky. I realize that this tweet I made is an extreme example, but you get the point. Even though I barely play Titan these days, I always noticed that D1 armor was considerably more slim, clean, and had a less cartoony art style overall, and I think a lot of people appreciated that. Granted, we have had some cool armor sets in Destiny 2 as well, but especially for the raid sets, the armor doesn't quite hit the same mark, at least in my opinion. Moving on from fashion, let's take a look at the vendors and more specifically how they offer their rewards. To start, D1 had vendor reputation in place of D2's infamous token system, and when you went to collect your rewards, you were actually able to choose between armor, cosmetics, and weapons. Let me ask you this. How many times have you been grinding for a certain weapon in Destiny 2, but the vendor refuses to give you anything but low stat armor that you'll literally never use? Considering that the chance of getting the exact roll you want on a D2 weapon like the Multimach is about 1 in 1,000, I feel like having the ability to at least not get useless class armor would be amazing. Umbral engram focusing has definitely helped, and I think D2 is definitely improving its vendor loot systems over time, but D1's ability to really cut down on that vendor RNG was really appreciated, especially when players were chasing iconic weapons like the Longbow Synthesis from Lord Shaxx. I kinda glossed over this earlier, but many D1 vendors had their own cosmetics and even ships for stuff like Crucible and Strikes. For example, the Dead Orbit faction in D1 featured a coveted Revenant shader that was almost completely black, and that gave players a reason to invest in ranking up their faction and hopefully unlocking that amazing sleek shader. Speaking of factions, whatever happened to those in Destiny 2? Since they've basically been removed from the game, it's safe to say that Destiny 1's faction system was without a doubt more interesting and relevant. Popular D1 weapons like Hung Jury and Wormwood originated in the faction loot pool, and it felt like your choice of faction actually mattered. It gave players a reason to play multiple characters with different faction allegiances in order to unlock armor, weapons, and cosmetics like the Revenant shader. These factions even had exotic class items that you could wear in addition to your regular exotic armor to represent your faction in style. Next up, Legendary Marks. You could get this currency by playing a variety of playlist activities and then turn them into a vendor of your choosing to get rewards. This ensured that you would always be rewarded for your time spent playing, and the ability to choose the vendor meant that you would be able to focus farm certain weapons and avoid all the clutter of world loot drops. Destiny 2's legendary shards, on the other hand, are far less valuable, and as of right now, they don't really have any purpose unless you want to buy thousands of RNG world loot engrams from the Cryptarch. The last thing I'll mention about vendors is the idea of the vendor refresh. Back in Destiny 1, the vendor's loot pool would entirely refresh and give us all brand new loot with the release of a new expansion like the Taken King. On the other hand, in D2, we just got the same weapons for years and years, and they occasionally added a couple new ones to the pools. Some vendors like Shaxx have just straight up been converted into giving world loot now, and ditching their unique activity-specific rewards with the minor exception of a couple armor sets. Considering that D2 has now been out for over a year longer than D1's entire lifespan, I'm pretty surprised that we've never seen a D1 style vendor refresh. We will almost certainly see some notable loot and vendor improvements throughout the duration of Witch Queen, so this may become less and less of an issue going forward. This next topic is probably a lot more controversial and refers to the delivery style of content. Destiny 1 featured massive content drops like the Taken King, which generated absurd amounts of hype, and rightfully so. D1 expansions just blow D2 expansions out of the water when it comes to the sheer amount of content delivered all at once, because D2 tends to drip feed the content with seasonal releases. I did a lot of research for this video to find out what the main things hardcore D1 fans missed the most, and a common theme was that many of them loved the massive D1 expansion content drops. They enjoyed the cycle of getting the content all at once, playing it out, and then maybe playing a bit less of the game during the content droughts. And I mean, if you've got rose-tinted glasses, you may have forgotten, but D1 had some serious issues with content droughts when the population would significantly dip. Personally, I actually kinda like D2's content delivery style because it ensures that we never have like 10-month-long content droughts, but evidently some people would disagree with me. Let me know in the comments. Would you prefer D1's content release style over the current seasonal model? And while you're down there, feel free to hit the like button. The next thing people often say D1 did better was the RPG style subclass customization and individual ability selection. In Destiny 1, you could select a perk from every column of your subclass, and that allowed you to buildcraft your subclass exactly how you wanted it. Unfortunately, the tree system in Destiny 2 can be really restrictive in comparison. For example, if you want to use the 6-shot golden gun, you're forced to use the explosive knife, and you can't choose the Blade Barrage knife fan or the weighted 1-shot throwing knife. I don't know about you guys, but I really liked having the ability to fully customize my subclass with my favorite abilities instead of being forced into a certain subclass tree. Each Guardian had more individuality due to their subclass choices, and it encouraged them to forge their own unique path instead of just choosing one of the trees. To Bungie's credit though, they are addressing this with stasis fragments and the new Void 3.0 and other 3.0 updates, so this is becoming less and less of an issue as time goes on. Even so, I think the D1 subclass customization screen is just a bit less convoluted than the aspect and fragment system offered in D2. Next up, we have the treatment of core playlists, namely Strikes, Crucible, and Gambit. Although Destiny 1 obviously didn't have Gambit, expansions always presented significant updates to Crucible and Strikes. The Taken King added 8 entirely new PvP maps, multiple new game modes and PvP quality of life updates, and 3 brand new strikes. After players complete all the story missions and basics of the game, the core activities like Crucible and Strikes become some of the most replayable and important parts of the game. That's why it felt amazing to get such notable updates to keep those core playlists interesting and rewarding for long-term players. This really contrasts Destiny 2, because in Beyond Light, for example, we gained 0 new PvP maps, lost 11 existing PvP maps, and got 2 new strikes. There were virtually no new quality of life updates or new modes added to the core playlist, so after players finished the new content, the lack of core playlist improvement, among other issues, led to a precipitous player base falloff. Destiny 1's Taken King expansion is widely regarded as the best Destiny expansion ever, and improving the core playlist was certainly not the only thing it got right. It brought new subclasses, and it did a great job of introducing each one with unique storylines and quests. Titans ventured to Burning Shrine, Hunters to Pantheon, and Warlocks to Blind Watch as they learned about the power fantasy of their new subclass abilities and backstory. Unlocking the new super and getting to test it out felt amazing, and I bet almost every D1 veteran watching this video still remembers these moments. By contrast, D2 just originally involved the exact same mission of farming some random enemies near a Shard of the Traveler, and it felt absurdly boring and repetitive. Although unlocking stasis was far less boring and the whole narrative was actually very cool, it still felt really repetitive to grind the exact same thing for all 3 characters and also repeat all those quests for stasis fragments and aspects. On a lighter note, an extremely popular D1 event was the Sparrow Racing League, or SRL for short. Players would compete with their friends or random strangers to see who could race their sparrows the fastest through intricate, unique maps and interactive features like teleporters, speed boosters, and obstacles, including this absolute raid boss of a forklift that halted even the most talented sparrow racers. I don't know, it was just in the perfect place on the track and almost everyone would crash into it. Anyway, the SRL was just a really unique and fun activity that had the potential to really bring the player base together, regardless of if they liked PvP or PvE. Even though there was some loot involved, it was mostly just an enjoyable activity that everyone could have a blast playing, regardless of their skill level. SRL was actually a seasonal event introduced around the holidays, and I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather screw around with some sparrow races than run errands and bake cookies for the 4th year in a row. With that said though, I don't think SRL provides a huge amount of replay value. If it was added to Destiny 2, I think players would go crazy for about a week, and then after that it would probably not be played all that often. It would absolutely be a cool thing to have for old time's sake, but I don't really see it becoming a highly played activity unless it got regular updates. Speaking of bringing things from D1 to D2, that's another topic I'd like to touch on. More specifically, I'm referring to the value of novelty from the perspective of veteran players. From strikes to crucible maps to destinations, Bungie has brought a lot of stuff from D1 into D2. It's certainly nostalgic and it feels amazing to be reunited with some of your old weapons and activities, but at the same time, I'd argue that reprised content doesn't provide the same level of value for most veteran players. In D1, everything from the enemies to the raids were completely original and mysterious because we had to figure out how everything worked with zero prior knowledge. On the other hand, whenever something like the Cosmodrome is brought into D2, it's cool and all, but for Destiny players who've been playing for the better part of a decade, they don't really care as much because there's almost nothing new to explore and things remain largely unchanged. Of course, I'd rather see returning content from D1 than no content at all, but overall, it's safe to say that D1 beats D2 when it comes to innovative ideas and creating a brand new universe that nobody has seen before. And I mean, since D2 is the sequel game after all, there's nothing wrong with D1 being more original, and it just logically makes sense for it to be that way. This might be another controversial one, but I've seen a few people argue that D1 had better map design. A subtopic that's commonly mentioned is the big combined arms maps, like First Light, where snipers could actually snipe and scout rifles actually had a place to shine. Personally, I'd love to see a large PvP map or the return of something like First Light, but I'd probably keep it out of modes like Trials and Competitive. Overall, on the topic of map design though, I think plenty of D2 maps like Javelin and Dead Cliffs are amazing, and the best path going forward is probably to make new maps inspired from the success of the most popular ones. Comment down below and let me know if you overall prefer D1 maps or D2 maps. I'm actually really curious to know. Next up, Arms Day. Destiny 1 had a system where the gunsmith would offer weekly orders where you could request packages in order to get certain unique weapons. These weapons each had some individuality to them, which made them sought after, and it gave players a reason to log on every week. It was also cool for the gunsmith to have an actual function other than just being a place to buy mods or materials. Moving on, class-specific weapons were a cool Destiny 1 feature that gave each class a bit more identity beyond just their abilities and appearances. Since the gunplay is basically the same between all the classes, having exclusive weapons that could only be played on a certain class made it feel special to play Warlock and gain access to the Tlaloc, or play Hunter and use the Stillpiercer. It provided an incentive to maybe go outside your comfort zone and play a different class to try out the weapons and embrace the narrative behind each class. D2 does actually have class-exclusive swords, but since all the other weapons can be used by all three characters, I think there's definitely some room for a few more class-specific weapons. While we're on the topic of weapons, a really notable thing about D1 weapons was the presence of optics options. This allowed you to change the scopes and sights on your weapons to really customize them and make them take on a variety of roles depending on what activity you were in. D2 seems to be phasing this out for some reason since very few new weapons have customizable optics and instead feature barrel options. I'm not really sure why this is the case, but having the ability to pick your preferred sight was a common D1 feature that I think a lot of players miss nowadays. Now that you've heard what I think D1 did better than D2, I highly recommend taking the journey through the 10 stages of every Destiny player. Or if you'd like to hear me make fun of Hunter mains like myself, click on screen now to watch the 10 stages of every Hunter main.